Okay, thank you all, and hopefully this mic works a little better than some of the uh, the distortion we were hearing earlier. But yeah, let me just introduce myself a little bit. In addition to what Catherine has already said, is I graduated from UBC and in Vancouver, and then I had three sort of major jobs here. One at Bell Northern Research in Ottawa, where I worked for about 5 years working on indexing systems and kind of systems that actually drove a lot of the infrastructure and the reporting that goes on inside of telephone switches and so forth. I spent then I moved to California and worked for IBM, Informix, in Menlo Park, and and I got a really great ride there, where I was able to actually build some leading cutting edge database technology used in transaction processing, used in analytics. A lot of multimodal. We were one of the early people to use video and unstructured data in databases. And then following that, IBM purchased Informix, and I came working on the research side. We run a lot of programs there, as well as working in both the unstructured data and the structured data, for this. And my disclaimer here is that actually I'm not going to be talking about IBM or selling a gun to IBM. So I'm here representing as myself, not on behalf of IBM. But I can take questions and anything else that you want to put in the chats and so forth. And really, I want to highlight a set of practices and techniques for what I call getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and then applying that to improve your work, your life, and your hobbies. Right. So let's get started here. If you start with how do you leverage some of the biggest data sets in the planet for social and business impact? What problems, skills, partners, teams do you need to be identified and solved? And how much time and budget do you have to do it in? These are all challenges that can be extremely uncomfortable, even more so in the environment that we're in today. And I'm going to show you some sort of lessons and techniques that I've learned in my career, and frankly, in my hobbies, to getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Reaching your destination is never a straight line, but if you know the tactics and you know the destination, you know the partners, you know the teams. I've proven to myself, and I've proven it to a lot of the teams that I work with and in, that you can overcome even the toughest of obstacles. So let's just jump into a couple of examples. One from the space program. Then I'm going to follow that with a personal example from my work at IBM. And then finally, I'll describe the methodology and principles that you can apply to your own work and life. So next, so let's take this example. And in the space program, on April 11th, 1970, the astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haas took off from Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. Apollo 13 was NASA's third crewed mission meant to land on the moon. But only 3 days later, after a series of minor and major problems and technical issues, the famous phrase, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem," was coined during this mission. The three astronauts eventually found themselves in a do or die situation as they were in danger of suffocating. The main problem? The ventilation system of their rescue boat, which was the lunar module, was not equipped for that many people over this long time. It was simply not capable of removing the occurring carbon dioxide resulting from the crew's exhaled air, and therefore seriously threatening all three lives. One promising solution was to connect the air filters from the two different, unfortunately incompatible aircraft modules. Now NASA Control Center was in charge. They had to improvise in the face of severe crisis. And here's where it gets interesting. Um, the challenge in a nutshell is to save, the lives of these three people, right? They had to find a way to connect two critical yet incompatible components, one round and one square, by using nothing but the equipment already inside the ship, thousands of miles up in space. Completing this task before time and air is running out, feeling the pressure. And fourth is making sure that their solution works, because there is no second chance. So next chart. So the sort of critical thing that you see there, that was their challenge, right? Now, now I'd say, look at this, some of these components here, right? It's more than 50 years later, and all of us working in software and systems and workflows, how many times have we had to connect two critical, incompatible systems? For me, that's almost a daily piece of work. And I'm sure it does to a lot of you as well, right? And the second part is they only get to use what you got, right? So you can't ask for more money. You can't ask for more time. You can't ask for more technology. You got to figure it out by using the equipment you already have. And by equipment, I also mean the skills, right? Of, what skills do you have? What technology do you have? And just work the task, right? And then the sort of, third thing, I'm sure we're all tasked with this is, we got to get this thing done before our time runs out, right? And it's not quite the oxygen part, but it sure feels like it at times, right? And then the other thing that is really key, because I've been there many times where we built systems, and we were all proud of ourselves that we built the system, but the next step is that we need to make sure that the solution actually works, and that means training people on how to actually use it and deploy it, right? So my message to you is, this is an example of a problem, and an example of some of the techniques, and we're going to get into more of it later. But that's the problem. Now let's talk about how did they actually do it? What are some of the techniques used for this in this very uncomfortable situation? So next. They did build up a solution, and then the solution in a nutshell was take the smartest brains and the brightest engineers, put them in a tiny room. And I highlight tiny room, right? Is it's the best that you got. It's, more is sometimes not always better, right? And then, understand what you actually have, right? So what is your box of available equipment? And by that, I mean, not just what software you have, what data you have, what models you have, right? You take a list and inventory of what you have and what are the skills that you have on your team, right? In this case, they using those two, pillars, they were able to build a solution. And you would think that, with the space, everything would be high tech and so forth. Actually, it turns out that, most of the solution was actually taped together with plastic bags, cardboard, tape, and other materials carried on board, right? And then that if that wasn't enough, they actually had to instruct the astronauts how to actually remotely build it and apply it, right? So, to this day, right, NASA still calls this, a successful failure, right? So click through, and now I say, well, this is what we need to do as well, right? Is 50 years later, right? We have similar processes to build and optimize, software and the systems and the workflows, right? But the key thing here is, how do you get comfortable in a very uncomfortable place, right? So let's continue. So the sort of next part of this is is uh, is actually how do we bring this all together, right, with your limited resources. And yes, I think we want to have a uh, uh,
A
chance
quick
to,
poll. Yeah.
yeah, a quick poll, right, so that we could you know understand what you guys are hearing. If this sound rings a bell to you, yeah, anything is, I got, Catherine, keep me honest, but I think we're looking for the poll there.
Yeah, we're looking for the poll. It looks like good answers here. Yeah, this is what they had in Houston, was the box of string, the tape, the cardboard box. And interesting that people are responding that it is people and the community and the collective knowledge. And by the way, can you hear me clearly now? I turned off my camera, or am I still garbled? Okay.
Yes, no, you are sounding good, Catherine.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll keep my face off of this thing then. Yes. People, and creativity, depth of experience, institutional knowledge, past experience. So interesting that it is not more technology that most people are saying, or switching to a new software, or duct tape.
Never underestimate duct tape. So yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next.
Okay, so next I wanted to give you an example. So this is space, and actually I highly recommend watching the movie Apollo 13. It gets into a lot of that, and it's quite entertaining. But let me go to an example in my work. Right, this happened about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when Jeopardy was first playing for. Watson was playing to win Jeopardy, right? As probably many of Watson ended up winning that event, and I wasn't directly involved in the development of that, but I was working with a lot of the people around there, and so once that happened, it turned out that there is a company, out of Texas, and Seton Healthcare, and they'd gotten really inspired by what might be possible with AI, right? And so they had gone to Armonk and gotten the big executive briefings from from the IBM brass, and got all excited about this, and they wanted to see, even though they knew it wasn't a product, and they still wanted to see what we could do, right? So a couple of days later, I got the call to fly out there with a couple of my, colleagues, and brainstorm with them and say, what could we do, for them, right? It turns out their business, problem that they were trying to solve, quite honorably, I must say, is that they were realizing that healthcare costs were keeping going up, and they wanted to expand their reach out into the communities, instead of, building even more massive, centralized, hospital systems, right? So they were trying to figure out, is there a way to use AI, or something like it, it and to, improve productivity and increase, the effectiveness, and so that they could, save money, and they could invest it in these, in the communities, and in these community, outreach places that they wanted to do, right? So we got sent out there, and I must say that, if any of you have worked with IBM before, usually when get to a big client, there's a ton of IBMers and there's a few people from the client. This was completely opposite. We walked into a room, and it was the CEO, all of his leadership. I mean, there's probably 20 of them in the room. The head of ER, the head of nursing, the chief medical officer, all the way down, through the operations. And meanwhile, it was basically four of us. We had three developers, and programmers. I was one of them, and then one project manager, right? So we had to go in there, and they had, decided on, what might be some use cases, right? So realize that we don't actually have any technology, that we don't have, couldn't use Jeopardy per se. And it was an awkward situation because, we were sort of learning about what the, hospital environment was, where their costs actually were, right? And where could, some applications, where could we think of some applications, right? So, it was uncomfortable because they didn't know a lot about technology. We didn't know a lot about healthcare, at least not, how the innards actually work, right? But we applied some of the same principles that, that we talked about in the space program, right? Is let's talk through, where we might apply this, right? Break it down. What do we have, right? And because we did have a bunch of technology things, and at the time, I was, running the group that had, all the NLP stuff, and we actually did have a lot of NLP product at that point, and doing unstructured data, text, and stuff like that. So we just kind of work through it, right? Is we say, okay, here's our boxes, figure out, what the dimensions might be, right? And, some of the first ones we kind of zoned in on, for example, were they wanted to see if they could, in the ER, there's a lot of monitoring going on, and critical information systems that, if they could make a decision or a recommendation, automatically, that could save lives. But quickly we realized, okay, well, that's actually going to end up being a medical device, and we don't really have time for that, right? So again, know your constraints, right? And then we started looking at, okay, well, what kind of data do you have, right? And so we looked at the notes, because we had done some work before with other companies to figure out, can we extract things out of documents, and the notes, and so forth, right? And so, we just had to keep working that and figuring out, what might be, the possibility. So then let's go to the next chart. So it turns out, after a bunch of investigation, we landed on congestive heart failure. So congestive heart failure readmission rates are really high, not only in the U.S. but around the world. And it turns out that CHF is one of the most expensive conditions for a healthcare system, right? So we started there, and we started to figure out, okay, where would we get data from this system, right? And I'm going to show you in a minute that um, what we quickly found, and I think you're going to find with you probably your projects as well, is sometimes the data isn't there that you think there is, and it's maybe not useful in the way that you thought. And so, and I'll give you a couple examples. I mean, being a technical guy, we want to know, what are the specific points. So, at one point we spent a couple hours with a cardiologist, right? And we realized that even the doctors couldn't agree on what the numbers actually meant, right? So is it elevated? Is it moderate? Is it high? There were no actual, specific numbers, and they didn't even agree, right? So we go, okay, well, that's not that's not good. And then we worked to the actual unstructured data. It's because we knew from some previous experience that a lot of the notes that the hospital takes when the patient comes in critical conditions, is really just written down as notes, and they're really the source of truth that comes out. It turns out, and so we were looking at both. We did look at the data from the EMR as well. But what we quickly sort of found is we were given all kinds of parameters. We read all the research reports, and you came up with 113 predictors that we thought would be from the structured data was going to be really good, right? And it turned out that it was completely the opposite. That the EMR actually had very poor quality data, and the notes had very high pieces of data. And the way we started this was, okay, we asked for, okay, show us some examples of notes, right? That get either written up and then put in the system. So, the hospital was kind enough to, print a bunch of these off, manually redact them, right, for all the PII kind of stuff, right? And we started to see that there was a lot of data there that was incredibly good, right? And so then we started, actually, looking at this more, right? And what it turned out is that and you see there's in this table, this is for the kind of techie guys, for geeks here a little bit, but is the if you look at the predictor analysis, right? The sort of, we zoned in on the ejection fraction, the smoking indicators, living arrangements, drug and health, drug and alcohol abuse, and then assisted living turned out to be the big ones. And if we looked at the structured data, the things that you thought would be, all nicely structured in a relational database, and, you could index it and all that kind of stuff, was actually missing tons of information, right? And then we looked at the same thing on, the unstructured data, the actual notes in there. And there's a real, the aha moment there was, okay, the unstructured data is way better. And the reason it's more better is because, when you come into an ER, into a critical situation, the notes get taken right then and there. And you're more, as a patient, if you're, in trouble, you probably, are more honest about, some of these, situations, right? And so they get more accurately, recorded, right? So in the end, let's flip to the next chart, because I think we got quite a bit more here, but is because now we had all these different data sources. I mean, there's still some structured data here, but a lot of it was unstructured, right? And then this is showing you, what the top indicators actually were. And again, this is for readmissions for congestive heart failure. So it turns out that some of the top indicators were actually came from the unstructured data, and you see them. In fact, it turns out that the ones that are kind of bolded here, they're only available from these notes, right? And it turned out the highest predictor, what it was, now that we could predict people, whether they were going to risk of readmissions, is that we could look at this and we can say, well, the ones that are on 3 and then 7 and then 18, the top one, right, turned out to be a extremely easy process change, right? Because what this shows, and you see this patient and you can see this vein that's showing, that means that they are dehydrated, right? And so if you release this patient, out of the ER or out of the hospital, the likelihood of them being readmitted fairly quickly is super high, right? So the actual, impact was all they had to do is add another field to the discharge chart, right? To say, if this is showing, then don't discharge them, keep them on fluids to do it. So simple, turned out to be a really simple solution. And we got a great result out of it. So again, sort of the lessons learned here is that you work with a team, you narrow it down into, what you actually have and what's available, right? And then you teach people how to actually then use the result, right? No, none of the people that are the doctors need to know about all this, predictive analytics that we did. All they needed to know was, look for this condition and don't discharge. So that's a sort of personal, one that you put in an awkward position, right? And unfortunately, that happens to a lot of us. Yeah, let's go to here. Is you get very uncomfortable very quickly, right? And so what I sort of learned through my experience is you have to get comfortable that it is uncomfortable, and how the way you deal with it is to look for ways to make you more comfortable in that, right? And so the things I mentioned before, right, is that first of all, let's understand who the smart people are that can help us, right? And then what is the actual objective here? What do you actually have control over, right? And because you probably are not going to get more funding, more time, more skills, right? So you got to take it down to what can you do, right? And how are you going to do it now that you know the constraints? And you don't have to be uncomfortable with the constraints. They are what they are. So the important part is to get comfortable with what you can control, right? And that is your team, that is your technology, and that is how you teach other people to then use what you produce. So the sort of advice there, right, is, and I see this all too often, right, is don't let fear defeat you before you even start, right? Because some of these things look incredibly impossible, right? And yet, if you break it down, right, and you say, okay, now what can I do? Let's make a plan, try it out, right, and expect that it's not going to be perfect. And my advice is that don't give up too early, right? Just keep hammering at it, and you'll get there, right? And then once you realize that, wow, that's really more of a process and a techniques thing, right? And if everybody's on board, with your team, this is the way we're going to approach it, then it becomes a lot more comfortable, right? So that's my sort of, quick take on, the, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. And you saw that in the example, from space. You saw it in my own personal example. I'm actually, you know, as we speak, involved in a bunch of these right now, in my own day job, right? We're trying to, do these, generative AI, techniques, and then how do we get comfortable with the use of them, the legislation of them, the ethics of them, all that kind of stuff. So next chart. So it's not just enough to kind of, do it in the moment. You need to like train, right? And and you realize that, I kind of put here, you need to train hard, learn hard, and then adjust and repeat, right? And this whole thing kind of came to me when I was actually, more focused on racing motocross at the time, and 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 I was struggling with, how to do that because, I came into it late, and I had a day job and all that kind of stuff. But once I realized that, the trick is to block out those other things, to focus on what you can do, right? And and then give yourself some time to rest and recover, because you will come back even stronger, right? And for me, that insight didn't come from initially work; it came from motocross. And but once I realized how successful that was, you know, and how I could apply it, I realized that I can apply that same mentality, to my work, and and that's what I've done, and what I continue to do, right? And this is something that all of us in this room, can do, all right, is to do it. Now do take the time to rest and recover, though, because I've also seen people go into it and they get burned out, right? So you do need to train hard, but you also need to, rest hard, if you like, if that makes sense. So all right, next chart here. And I would say that, this is that realization is really what got me on the path to IBM fellow, and to where I am today. And also, I continue to race, mountain bikes and stuff like that. So I'm practicing it on both sides of my career and life balance. But all of this, right, is it's super important that you keep building community, right? It's, for me, that's the thing that actually brings the biggest reward, and because you learn from other people, you learn from, what they do, what they think, right? And I encourage you to, bring in skeptics, right, into that, right? Don't just be an echo chamber, amongst yourself, is because that's where you learn. And I encourage, everybody, and I have a lot of mentors that I work with, is you need to be a mentor, so figure out somebody that can help you, and then you yourself need to be teaching people, right, and mentoring them and building the community, because this is all about the community, right? If we come back to, what makes this thing, uncomfortable, right? It's because you don't know things, but other people do. So that community will help you make those connections, right? And build those bonds, right? So I just, continue to say, build your community, make friends, right? Be kind, be honest. Now, realize that being kind and being honest may be a contradiction, right? I've been forced and not forced, but I encourage, very frank, dialogue, right? Is, sometimes people don't want to hear it, but they have to, right? So also, don't be afraid to, speak your concerns, right? And tell it as you think it is, right? And why, right? Because that will make you a better person. It'll make the team understand, why you think that, right? And it's going to get people to a better place, right? Um, so that's it for that chart. Now, somebody, Catherine asked me this question, right? And many others, right? What happens if you crash, right? And I'm going to tell you straight up that you will crash sometimes, right? And, if you think of, the whole methodology of being agile, right? It's, you're effectively breaking it down into smaller crashes, but you are crashing, right? And then you're learning from it, right? So, my advice to you is like, if you crash, the first thing you should look for is like, why did that happen, right? What didn't I account for in my plan? What am I going to do differently next time, right? Get advice from your team, right? In this case, this was a mountain bike park up in Tahoe, and luckily I had the risk management, knowing that this might happen, and I got all the right armor, right, to make sure I didn't get actually hurt when I did fall, but but the key thing was that's what I did, right? Is that this was my first time down it, and I took a bad line and and toppled over, and that I had a friend of mine that was actually sitting there watching it, right? And again, I asked him, like, what did you see, right? And what happened, right? And then the other thing is, forgive yourself. It's people, sometimes they feel really down because they failed, right? I actually don't take it that way. I take it as, you need to know where your limits are. And that means occasionally you're going to have to, test them. And you're for sure going to, do something wrong, right? So don't take it out on yourself. It's part of learning. And think of the last side, right? A successful failure is a good thing, right? So, and then the other part is, keep practicing in a contained environment, right? And don't just, decide that you're going to go jump off a cliff and hope the parachute opens. It doesn't work that way. You need to start small and then keep repeating. So let's see. Then I think we're keep going. So let me kind of sort of wrap up a bit, and then we can take any comments or questions or polls. And so in summary, it's really sort of three things about getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Is don't let the fear stop you before you even start, right? Too many people say, no, it's too overwhelming, can't do it, I'm scared. Yeah, that's all true, but you should still try it, and you got to figure out how to break it down and make a plan, right? And then you got to try it out, and you'll adjust, right? But you do need to make a plan. So if you don't make a plan, then you're gonna probably make the same mistake again. So you need to be able to do that. And then the second part we just talked about, train hard, learn, repeat, right? And it's again sort of, there will be bumps in the road, right? But I can really tell you from my experience and the other people that I mentor that follow this kind of methodology, is that you're going to be a lot better off because you are now learning how to get through these situations, and that gives you confidence, right? And that confidence, right, is going to take you to a whole nother level of execution, right? A whole nother level, right? You should think of it as, it's not a step, it is a massive leap, right? So it's worth it. It's just keep at it, because that confidence, builds success. And then, again, always sort of, build that community. Right? And I'm so excited when Catherine first suggested, coming to this conference, because, this is where communities get built, right? And so, take the advantage to build your own networks here. Reach out to the people that you heard comments from, or you have questions. Engage them, right? And engage the speakers. So yeah, it's really super important. And I know that if you take even some of this away, I think I'd be really excited to hear how you do. And then but I think you're gonna do a lot better, because now it's manageable, right? You put bounds on things, you know how to practice it, and you have a community that's going to help you, right? So if everybody in this meeting today can help support each other, right? It's not going to go you're a little bit better and they're a little bit better. It's like everybody is a lot better, right? And so I've seen that myself in my own career. I've seen it in my sports, and I really think that can make a difference for this team. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was amazing. You can see people doing the wave here. It's
Thank you.
awesome. And yeah, let's see. Don't see any questions in the chat, just a lot of thanks. I'm going to stop sharing here. Let's see if I can come back on camera. Thank you. Really appreciate it. A lot of wisdom.
Well, yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And I really wish you guys well with the learning some of these practical things. And if you're looking for a movie, you can put Apollo 13 on your list.
Yeah, I do see one good question from Ben Regier, and that is, how do you know when it is time to give up on a particular approach?
I would say when you're no longer there, you're reaching the point of diminishing returns, right? Is that you keep banging it in. At some point you got to say, it might not be solvable, right? So you might need to do something else, right? So yeah, that's a good question, because you do need to define when enough is enough, right? And you need to move on and maybe try a different approach. Maybe because we talked about the constraints. Maybe we need some other people, right? To help out, right? Because they'll have a different perspective. Maybe you need to switch to a different technology base, right? I encounter this all the time, where the products they say they work, they don't actually work. We help them fix it. It's not fixed enough, right? And at some point you got to just call it and say, we got to try something different, right? It doesn't mean that you're giving up on solving the problem. You're giving up on the parameters within it. So you start changing those, and change the technology, change the point of view. Maybe there's another way that the workflow could have done, right? Maybe there's some other data that you're missing, right? And because you do need to do that. And the example at Seton, right, is that we started with the structured data, and we realized it wasn't good enough. it just wasn't, right? So, we had to, switch to relying heavily on the undergoing. So we had to make that was a steep U-turn, right? Um, and there's other things like that where, I've had to, say, let's step back, right? And maybe we've been, at this too long, and we're at diminishing returns. So you got to, so as you're making a plan, right? Actually, I should have said this earlier, probably, right? When you make a plan, you need to understand, what do you articulate as success, and what do you articulate as failure, right? You do need to like articulate the failure part, right? Because if you start going in there, you go, oh, wait a sec, that we don't want to be there, right? And sometimes when you're in the moment, it's you're all, well, but we've already spent all this money, we've already invested in these people, blah blah blah, right? Yeah, that's all true, but if you're not making progress the way you set it out, you either got to change your goals, or you're going to say, we got to change the methodology, the technology, or the data, or the model, right? Whatever it is, right? The customer, right? So yeah, it's really important to put those bounds. Don't just keep digging a hole and hoping it'll get better. A lot of times they don't. I think you're on mute, Catherine.
Technology problems.
There you are.
I'm just saying thank you. Really appreciate the time, the energy, the reminder about community. Thanks so much.